You're watching a senator praise the Homeland Security nominee for his ability to find common ground with people who have fundamental differences. Her example of his diplomatic skill? A trip where he sat down with the president of Syria, a former al-Qaeda member, for the first official U.S. visit in 15 years. Senator Ernst just told a confirmation hearing that the nominee demonstrated leadership by meeting with someone who admitted he was affiliated with al-Qaeda. She frames this as evidence of his ability to bridge divides and work with difficult partners. The nominee describes the Syrian president saying he was fed propaganda when younger but changed his views while in American prison in Iraq. He compared his al-Qaeda affiliation to America's alliance with Russia and China in World War II. Ernst says this shows wisdom, someone who admits past mistakes and wants a relationship with the United States. She calls it an example of how we all have such significant differences, but can bring our countries closer together. This isn't a cautionary tale about the risks of legitimizing extremist-linked leaders. It's a credential. It's proof the nominee can work across divides. The framing matters because Ernst is arguing that someone who can negotiate with a former al-Qaeda affiliate will represent us very well and make our country safer. That's not threat assessment. That's rehabilitation of extremist ties as diplomatic achievement. What you're about to hear is how meeting with former terrorists becomes evidence of bipartisan skill, and why that logic matters when the person being praised will oversee counterterrorism operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Christy, for being here as well. Senator Mullin, I have to say, I'm just going to be blunt, very honest with you. I hope that the president is watching. I am going to say to the president, I am really upset that he has made your nomination. Why? Because I will be losing from the Senate one of the best friends that I have here, truly. But in that same accord, I am so grateful to the president for making your nomination to Department of Homeland Security. So we've had a lot of discussion here. I know, just as Senator Fetterman said, there are a lot of differences and opinions on the politics surrounding DHS. And Senator Fetterman mentioned that he grieves for all of those that we have lost, those protesters. We grieve the loss of young women, young men that we have seen at the hands of those that have migrated illegally into the United States of America. We grieve them all, and I think we can acknowledge that. And it's important that we do that. We're in really trying times right now. And one of the things that I want to focus on right now is the bipartisanship that you have had with so many members in the House, in the Senate, the relationships that you have outside of this body, because I think it's really important, because we get in the political fights all the time, and we're all trying to score points back and forth. Bipartisanship is not very sexy. But I think we need a lot more of it. So Josh Gottheimer was here today. I respect him so much. And the fact that you remain friends today is incredibly important. I noticed you also gave Joe Kennedy a shout out. So I sent him a picture I took of you from the dais because I know Joe really well as well. There are so many relationships that we have in this body, and I wish more people would see that we have those relationships. We carry them in our hearts. It means we are better people because we open our minds to listen. And to that point, I want to thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for being here as well. Because what started out as a very big difference between you and Mr. O'Brien, you found a way to both of you come together to share thoughts and ideas and turn something really good out of that discourse. And I think more people need to learn how to do that. And so to all my friends sitting here in the dais and those that are watching, is that this is how America works, where we're able to take differences and come together and not just shout at one another, but come together and figure out a way forward. That's what makes this country such an incredibly brilliant country, is that we can recognize those differences. So I want to talk a little bit about a trip that we took last year. So many folks know that you serve on armed services, I serve on armed services. We do congressional delegation visits. And a little over a year ago, or about a year ago, Senator Mullin led a congressional delegation visit into a country that had not been visited by an official delegation trip in 15 years. Along on that trip, I was also there. Chairman Smith was on this trip as well as Democrat Jimmy Panetta of California. We went to Syria. We sat down with the president there, al-Shara, for his first official visit from the United States of America. Now, a lot of people will say, he was a member of al-Qaeda. What are you doing sitting down with somebody that was a member of al-Qaeda? It's the same reason we sit down with people that we have differences with, is to find a way forward. So, Senator Mullin, I would like you to talk a little bit about that trip and why you believed it was important that we do that.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. You're right. The president of Syria wasn't really somebody we should have a lot of common ground with. And we actually talked about that. Him and I talked about that. Had a very blunt relationship about it. But the fact is, our world is different. And there's different leaders for different countries in different places. And you have to understand the region and the area they're in. We're not in the business of necessarily picking the leaders, but when we do, hopefully there's a way that we can work it out. And if you remember the president at the time, he said, when I was younger, I was fed a lot of propaganda. And I'm paraphrasing this. He says, but when I was in American prison in Iraq, he started looking at things different. And then he also went on to say, yes, I was affiliated with al-Qaeda, but it's much like you guys being affiliated with Russia. It was interesting to me knowing how you went through the history. He said, it's much like you guys being affiliated with Russia and China in World War II, and look where you're at today. Sometimes in war, when we're fighting for our country, I left Iraq and came back and fought for Syria because that's my home. We have the most diverse population in the history of the world in Damascus. And I don't want the foreign influence. And after I got out, I realized my fight is for my country, not for this necessarily organization, but for me to get resources, for me to get fighters, for me to be able to fight for my country. And hopefully, even though he said I never planned on being president of the country. I was just wanting to get my home back. I find myself here. And he was very open. He says, I have made mistakes. And I said, I've made mistakes too. And I said, we're not perfect, but if we can work together to be a trust but verified, he says, I want a relationship with the United States. Mm-hmm. I want to have that relationship. That's not common for somebody with al-Qaeda ties. That's somebody that says, yes, my past is my past, but I'm looking to the future. And I think we all have past. In past, we can learn from. We learn from successes and failures in our past. But if we can grab the past that we made a mistake on and say, yeah, that's a mistake, I'm not going to make it again, that's a lesson. That's where wisdom comes from. If you can also learn from your successes, then that's also where wisdom comes from, and that's considered someone that has the potential to be a leader. And I would rather work with those leaders like that than to continue to see the civil war that was going on, and in some cases still going on in Syria.
Yes, and thank you. And I just use this because my time has expired, just to demonstrate how we all have such significant differences. We can come from different backgrounds, but I've been on a lot of congressional delegation visits, folks, a lot in the 12 years that I've been here. But to watch Senator Mullin lead this delegation and to be able to speak to someone that is far different than we are and bring our countries that closer together, I know that he will do that with every one of us serving in Congress. I know you will represent us very well. You will represent the administration very well. You will make our country safer. So thank you, Senator Mullin. Thank you, Christy, very much for your friendship as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator.
What Senator Ernst did in that hearing wasn't just praise for a colleague. It was a reframing of extremist affiliation as diplomatic credential, and why that reframing matters when the person being confirmed will oversee agencies responsible for identifying and countering terrorist threats. If you understand what Ernst is celebrating and what questions she's not asking, you'll see how normalization of extremist ties works through the language of reconciliation and bipartisanship. Start with the core claim. Ernst praises the nominee for leading a congressional delegation to Syria to meet with President Ahmed al-Sharaa, a former al-Qaeda affiliate, for the first official U.S. visit in 15 years. She frames this as evidence of his ability to work across differences and find common ground with difficult partners. The nominee recounts al-Sharaa saying he was fed propaganda when younger but changed his perspective while imprisoned in Iraq. Al-Sharaa compared his al-Qaeda affiliation to America's World War II alliance with Russia and China, suggesting past alignments don't define future relationships. Ernst accepts this framing without scrutiny. She calls it wisdom to admit past mistakes and seek relationships with the United States. She says everyone has a past they can learn from, and the Syrian president's willingness to acknowledge his represents leadership potential. That's a profound moral equivalence. Affiliation with a terrorist organization responsible for mass civilian casualties, beheadings, and attacks on American forces is not comparable to strategic wartime alliances between nation-states. One is state-to-state cooperation in existential conflict. The other is individual participation in designated terrorism. The rehabilitation language is key. Al-Sharaa says he never planned to be president, just wanted to get his home back, and had to work with al-Qaeda to get resources and fighters. That's a justification, not an explanation. Joining a terrorist organization to achieve political ends is the definition of terrorism. Saying you did it for your country doesn't make it legitimate resistance. It makes it terrorism with nationalist motivation. And when Ernst treats that narrative as evidence of character growth rather than admission of extremist activity, she's normalizing the logic that terrorism is acceptable if the cause is sympathetic. The trust but verify framing compounds this. The nominee says they agreed on trust but verify, suggesting ongoing skepticism about al-Sharaa's intentions. But Ernst doesn't present it that way. She presents it as an example of bridge building and bringing countries closer together. That's diplomatic language for legitimizing a government led by someone with terrorist ties. And when you're the Secretary of Homeland Security, the person responsible for identifying threats to the United States, your willingness to legitimize former terrorist affiliates as reformed leaders sends a message about who gets scrutinized and who gets benefit of the doubt. Here's the policy consequence. Homeland Security oversees counterterrorism operations, designation of terrorist organizations, and threat assessment for individuals with extremist ties. If the Secretary believes that past al-Qaeda affiliation can be rehabilitated through claimed change of perspective, that belief will filter into how agencies evaluate current threats. Former extremists who claim they've changed will get more deference. Intelligence suggesting ongoing ties will be weighed against the possibility of reform. And the threshold for designating someone as a threat will rise because the Secretary has publicly endorsed the idea that terrorist affiliation is a past mistake people can grow from. The bipartisanship framing is also strategic misdirection. Ernst says, bipartisanship isn't sexy, but we need more of it, and she praises the nominee's ability to work with people across differences. But this isn't bipartisan cooperation between Democrats and Republicans on legislation. It's diplomatic engagement with a foreign leader who has terrorist ties. Conflating the two makes criticism of the Syria meeting sound like opposition to bipartisanship. It's a rhetorical move that shields questionable foreign policy from legitimate scrutiny by wrapping it in the language of domestic cooperation. What's missing is any discussion of whether meeting with al-Sharaa advanced American interests, what concessions he made in exchange for recognition, or what intelligence agencies assessed about his ongoing ties to extremist networks. Ernst doesn't ask those questions. She just celebrates that the meeting happened and that al-Sharaa said he wants better U.S. relations. Wanting relations isn't the same as being a reliable partner, and stating you've changed isn't evidence you've changed. The wisdom framing is particularly dangerous. Ernst says wisdom comes from learning from mistakes and successes, but learning from mistakes requires consequences, accountability, and changed behavior over time. Al-Sharaa hasn't faced legal accountability for his terrorist affiliation. He hasn't been out of power long enough to demonstrate sustained changed behavior. He's currently president of a country in civil conflict with ongoing extremist activity. Treating his self-reported change as evidence of wisdom isn't assessment, it's credulity. If any of this concerns you, recognize that confirmation hearings reveal how nominees think about threats, not just whether they're qualified. When a senator praises someone for legitimizing a former al-Qaeda affiliate as evidence of diplomatic skill, and the nominee accepts that framing, you're learning that past extremism will be weighed as redeemable rather than disqualifying. And when that person oversees threat assessment for the entire country, redemption narratives replace security scrutiny.